I'm Mavis Hill, 38 years old, and I live in a quiet suburb of Ohio with my husband, Noah, and our 9-year-old daughter, Lily. On the surface, we seem like any typical family, one that juggles work, school, and the endless whirl of daily life. But behind that calm exterior, I'm the one who carries the weight of holding it all together. I work as a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, a job I've dedicated myself to for 14 years. It's demanding and emotionally draining, but it's also where I find purpose. Taking care of children who are sick or hurt, calming frightened parents. It's a responsibility I don't take lightly. Balancing my career and family isn't simple. Mornings are a blur of preparing lunches, packing Lily's backpack, and making sure Noah has what he needs before we all head in different directions. Noah's steady and supportive, but he's in sales, working unpredictable hours, which means a lot of the household logistics fall on my shoulders. There's a rhythm to it, though, a dance I've learned to perform without missing a beat. What many don't see, though, is how much energy it takes to manage not just the immediate family, but the extended one. My parents and sister live nearby, and their presence is constant, sometimes in ways I wish it weren't. Family gatherings are frequent but often fraught with tension. My sister, Brooke, is the golden child, the successful businesswoman everyone admires. At family events, she's the star, the one who always gets the praise and attention, while I fade into the background. It's something I've learned to live with, a silent ache beneath the surface. That brings me to today. We're getting ready for a trip, a family vacation to Disney World, or at least it's supposed to be. My parents and Brooke are flying out soon, and Lily is coming with them. Noah and I won't be on this trip. Work and schedules make it impossible. I've spent the morning packing Lily's bags, making sure she has everything she needs. Her favorite stuffed animal, sunscreen, the little notebook she uses to write stories. I watch her bounce around, excited, finally able to enjoy something purely joyful. I remember when I was her age, dreaming about trips like this, Disney, the magic, the escape. For Lily, it should be just that, magic and fun. I tell her to hold my hand tightly at the airport, to listen carefully to her grandparents, and to be brave if anything feels scary. It feels strange giving her away, even just for a few days. A mother's instincts are sharp. I sense something beneath the surface, a quiet tension I can't quite shake. My parents, their house is always immaculate, and their smiles are polished, but behind that facade is a coldness I try not to think about. My father, Gerald, is a stern man, the kind who believes in discipline over affection. My mother, Elaine, often follows his lead, smoothing things over but rarely standing up for me. They love Lily in their own way, but love here comes with conditions, obedience, silence, and sometimes sacrifice. As I finish the last of Lily's packing, my phone buzzes with a family group text from my mother. We're on schedule. Boarding soon. Lily ready? The message feels cold, more like a command than a check-in. I type back quickly. Yes, she's with me now. All set. I wonder what lessons they have planned for Lily this time. In this family, lessons usually come wrapped in disappointment and expectation. Noah helps Lily with her shoes, giving her a warm squeeze on the shoulder. Have fun, kiddo. We'll pick you up in a few days. He smiles, but I see the worry in his eyes. I do too. We load into the car, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. At the airport, the busy terminal hums around us, the rolling of suitcases, the chatter of travelers, the distant announcements over the speakers. I hold Lily's hand tightly as we approach the gate. Her small fingers curl around mine, trusting and unafraid. But inside, my heart tightens. Something about today feels different, heavier. My father's voice cuts through the crowd when we reach the gate. She needs a lesson, he says, looking at me with a cold finality that pierces deeper than any words before. I glance at Lily, her eyes wide but trusting, and then back to Gerald, whose face is unreadable, distant. I realize then that this trip won't just be about Disney magic. It will unravel everything I thought I knew about family, love, and trust. And as my family steps forward to board the plane, something inside me shifts. I'm left holding Lily's hand in the airport terminal, wondering how we ended up here, and what comes next. I've thought a lot about how we got here, how my family became what it is today. And the truth is, the seeds were planted long before I was a mother or even an adult. Growing up, the dynamics between my sister Brooke and me were painfully clear, even if no one ever said it outright. Brooke was, and still is, the golden child. She was the one my parents praised for every accomplishment, the one they defended fiercely. I was the responsible one, expected to be reliable and self-sacrificing, but never quite good enough to deserve that same kind of admiration or protection. From a young age, I learned to read the room, to anticipate the moods and expectations of my parents, especially my father, Gerald. He was a man of rigid rules and strict discipline, the kind of father who valued order and obedience above all else. He had high expectations for his children, but it was clear that Brooke's success and charm won his favor in a way I never seemed to match. She could do no wrong in his eyes, while I was often the scapegoat, the one held responsible when things went wrong. There were countless moments that stuck with me over the years. I remember family vacations where Brooke would be packed off with the best gifts, the best rooms, and glowing praise from mom and dad, while I was expected to quietly deal with anything that didn't go according to plan. Whether that meant calming down younger cousins or staying up late to help Elaine organize things behind the scenes. These trips were supposed to be fun, but for me, they often felt like reminders of my place, helpful and invisible. Birthdays and holidays were no different. Brooke's achievements were celebrated with elaborate parties and distant relatives showering her with compliments. When I tried to share my own successes, like an honor roll certificate or a small award from school, the response was lukewarm at best, more of a polite nod than genuine excitement. I learned to keep my accomplishments to myself, knowing they wouldn't stir the same pride or affection. My mother, Elaine, played a more complicated role in all of this. She wanted peace in the family more than anything else. She was the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over conflicts before they erupted. But that often meant sweeping my frustrations under the rug or dismissing my feelings to keep the calm. She loved us both, I believe, but her love was expressed through control and appeasement rather than open support. If it meant protecting Gerald's authority or maintaining the family's appearance, she was willing to suppress her own empathy. This pattern of favoritism and exclusion shaped how I saw myself for years. I internalized the idea that I was the one who had to sacrifice, who had to be strong and dependable. While Brooke could shine and be admired without much effort, I was the responsible daughter, the one expected to set an example, but never quite the one who deserved to bask in the glow of family love. Even as an adult, these old dynamics lingered. At family gatherings, Brooke's success was front and center, her business achievements, her glamorous lifestyle, her charisma. And I was still standing quietly on the sidelines, often overlooked or gently criticized if I didn't meet their unspoken standards. It was exhausting, walking this tightrope of trying to please without pushing too hard, trying to be seen but not too much. The exclusion wasn't always obvious. It was subtle, a sidelong glance, a change in tone, a conversation that stopped when I entered the room, and over time, I excused it all as just family tradition, or the way things were supposed to be. After all, every family has its quirks and faults, right? I told myself that this was love, just expressed differently, that if I just tried harder, if I just sacrificed more, I might finally earn genuine belonging. But beneath that hopeful veneer, the truth was murkier. I felt a growing resentment and self-doubt, a shadow following every interaction. Why did my worth always seem conditional? Why was I the one expected to uphold the family's image while being denied the warmth and acceptance that Brooke enjoyed? It was a quiet ache, one I rarely voiced but carried deep inside. Looking back now, I see how those early experiences built a foundation for everything that followed. The sacrifices, the suppressed pain, the silent endurance. They created a pattern of imbalance that I desperately tried to manage, but never fully escaped. And I realize more clearly than ever how those childhood lessons shaped not only my family's dynamics, but also the way I allowed myself to be treated as an adult. That's why today's trip, this moment at the airport, feels like a fracture opening wide. The same favoritism, the same coldness, the same painful lesson my father wanted to teach with Lily. It's all connected to this long history. Brooke still gets her way. I'm still left to pick up the pieces. And the question that haunts me now is how long I'll let this continue before I finally draw the line. For years, I carried more than just emotional burdens from my family. I carried financial ones too. When I say my parents and sister leaned on me, I mean it in ways that went far beyond casual favors or family support. I was the one they called when their house needed repairs, when bills piled up, or when loans had to be taken out. I co-signed for their mortgages, credit cards, and even a car loan for Brooke's business venture. Each time, I told myself it was temporary, that I was helping out the people I loved, that it was just what family does. But the truth was, it felt more like a trap tightening around me, a debt that came with strings attached. I remember the first time I co-signed a loan for my parents. They needed to renovate the kitchen, something basic but expensive, and they didn't have enough credit on their own. I was hesitant at first. I had student loans and a mortgage of my own, a job that wasn't exactly a goldmine, but they assured me it was just a formality, that they would pay every cent on time. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to be the reliable daughter who steps up when her parents need her, so I signed. Months later, I found myself juggling payments and calls from creditors. Sometimes my parents would assure me they had it covered, but then I'd get a past due notice. I'd cover the shortfall quietly, never bringing it up for fear of sounding ungrateful or demanding. After all, what daughter wants to confront her parents about money, especially when they've always acted like everything was fine? Then there were the home repairs. When Dad's health started to decline, the house needed modifications, grab bars in the bathroom, a new heating system, roof repairs. These weren't small expenses, and somehow, I ended up footing the bill more often than not. I'd take extra shifts at the hospital or pick up overtime, just to cover the costs, all while keeping it under wraps. I didn't want my husband Noah to worry more than he already did. He'd already expressed concern about how much I was stretching myself, but I convinced myself it was necessary. It wasn't just money either. There was caregiving too. My parents' health gradually declined, and I became the one running their medical appointments, managing medications, and sometimes staying overnight when they needed extra help. I'd coordinate with home health aides, handle their insurance claims, and even intervene when Elaine, my mother, was too overwhelmed or passive to act. This invisible labor added an emotional weight I carried alongside my nursing job and family life. Brooke, meanwhile, seemed to glide through life untouched by these struggles. Sure, she had her own pressures. Running a business isn't easy, but she was always the favored daughter, the one who could call on Mom and Dad for financial backing without hesitation. I watched as they funded her ventures, subsidized her lifestyle, and praised her every step of the way. It stung that my sacrifices often went unnoticed or were met with cold thanks. Noah noticed. I remember one evening after a long day, he sat me down gently and said, "Mavis, you're doing too much. This isn't sustainable. You have to set limits for your own sake and for Lily's." His words echoed a truth I was reluctant to face. I wanted to believe my family would recognize my efforts, that my steadfastness would earn me a place of respect and genuine belonging. But deep down, I knew that hope was fragile. Still, I kept going. I kept co-signing loans, paying bills, fixing problems, because giving up meant admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready for that. I told myself that someday, the scales would balance, that my family would see me not just as the responsible one, but as someone worthy of care and warmth. But every act of generosity seemed to deepen the divide. Every sacrifice made me more invisible, more dispensable. This pattern of giving until I was drained set the stage for what was about to happen at the airport, the moment when the lesson my father insisted Lily needed was really about control and punishment, not love. The same family that leaned on me for financial and emotional support would soon show their true colors by leaving my daughter behind. I tucked away these memories as I held Lily's hand at the gate, knowing that the sacrifices I made hadn't bought me the loyalty or kindness I hoped for. Instead, they had made me vulnerable to this betrayal, and as my family's plane prepared to take off without Lily, I understood that these years of giving had led me to a crossroads. It was time to rethink everything, and to fight for the dignity and safety of my little girl. I still remember that family dinner like it happened yesterday. It was supposed to be just another gathering, a chance for everyone to catch up, share a meal, and pretend that the fractures beneath the surface weren't there. The house was warm, smells of roasted chicken and fresh bread filling the air, dishes clinking softly, the low murmur of voices weaving through the living room. But beneath the easy rhythms, tension hovered. I could feel it in the set of my shoulders, the way my stomach tightened even before the first course was served. Gerald, my father, was in his element, taking charge of conversations, his voice deep and commanding as it always was. Everyone seemed to hang on his words, but I knew better. To him, I was always the one to criticize, the one to find fault with. That night, the focus turned to me in a way that was both humiliating and bitterly familiar. The topic came up when we started talking about the kids, Brooke's children, with their perfect grades and endless extracurricular achievements, the kind of success stories parents brag about. Gerald's eyes drifted over to me, and with a voice loud enough for the whole room to hear, he said, "Mavis's parenting could learn a thing or two from Brooke. Lily's been struggling with her schoolwork, and frankly, she doesn't have the discipline that Brooke's kids do. Maybe if Mavis spent more time enforcing rules instead of trying to be her friend, Lily wouldn't be so wayward." The room fell silent for a moment. My mother, Elaine, quickly shifted the conversation, her voice a little too high, a nervous laugh attempting to smooth over the sting. But the damage was done. I felt my cheeks burn, not just from the public criticism, but from the cold contempt behind my father's words. It wasn't just a criticism of my parenting. It was a dismissal of all the late nights spent helping Lily with homework, the sacrifices to make sure she had every opportunity I never did. It was a message that I was failing, that I was somehow less worthy. Brooke, sitting across from me, gave a polite smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, as if to say, "Don't take it personally." But I did. I took it deeply, like a wound reopening. It wasn't the first time Gerald had compared me unfavorably to her, but hearing it out loud, in front of family, made it raw and undeniable. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, forcing a polite nod. "Lily's doing her best," I said quietly, "and we're working on it at home." But Gerald wasn't done. "Best isn't good enough," he said sharply. "You have to be firm. Life isn't about coddling kids. It's about discipline and responsibility. Maybe if you'd set better examples, she'd be more like Brooke's kids." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to list all the times I stayed up late with Lily, the pediatric advice I applied, the love I poured in despite the exhaustion. But the words stuck in my throat. Family dinners weren't the place for confrontation, and Elaine's quick change of subject made it clear that no one wanted a scene. Still, the coldness lingered. Every bite of food I took felt heavy, as if carrying the weight of Gerald's judgment. I caught Noah's eye across the table, his expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. He squeezed my hand under the table, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like I was being dismantled in front of everyone. That night, as I lay in bed after everyone had gone home, the words replayed in my mind. Gerald's criticisms were more than just an offhand remark. They were a public declaration that I wasn't enough, that my sacrifices and struggles didn't measure up. It was a reminder of the hierarchy I'd always known, but hoped might someday change. I thought about Lily, how she looked up to me with trust and love, unaware of the harsh judgments whispered behind closed doors. It made me question everything. Was I failing her? Was I really as inadequate as my father claimed? The doubt gnawed at me, but so did a quiet resolve. If this was the tone of the family I'd come from, then I needed to find strength elsewhere. That dinner was a turning point, a painful but necessary crack in the facade. It exposed the rawness of my family's favoritism and cruelty, and it forced me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding, that my achievements, my parenting, and my very worth were not going to be acknowledged or respected under my father's watch. And yet, even as the wound throbbed, I held on to a fragile hope that maybe one day my family would see me for who I really was. But deep down, I knew the lesson they wanted to teach Lily, the cold, unyielding lesson Gerald spoke of at the airport, was coming from this same place of harsh judgment and unfair expectations. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what that really meant. The moment when everything shattered arrived faster than I ever imagined it could. We had reached the bustling airport terminal, the cacophony of voices, rolling luggage, and intermittent announcements swirling around us like a storm. My heart pounded unevenly as I clutched Lily's small hand, feeling the soft warmth of her skin against mine. It was supposed to be a joyful send-off, my daughter embarking on a magical adventure with her grandparents and sister. But the air between us was thick with an unspoken tension I couldn't shake. My father, Gerald, stood rigid and unyielding near the boarding gate. His face was set in that familiar mask of stern authority, his eyes cold and distant. Elaine hovered nearby, her expression carefully neutral, as if she were rehearsing the lines she would deliver when this was all over. Brooke lingered behind them, her polished smile masking whatever she truly thought, or didn't think, about what was happening. "Lily needs a lesson," Gerald said finally, his voice low but sharp, slicing through the noise of the terminal. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I caught the weight behind his words, the cruel finality that left no room for argument. She needs to understand consequences. Maybe a little time on her own will do her some good. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as the meaning of those words sank in. Lily, my gentle, trusting 9-year-old, was about to be left alone, abandoned really. In the middle of a crowded, unfamiliar airport, my mouth opened and closed, desperate for words, for reason, for him to reconsider, but nothing came out. The world around me seemed to tilt, the bright fluorescent lights above flickering as panic and disbelief surged through me. Elaine glanced at me, her eyes briefly flickering with something, guilt, perhaps, but she quickly masked it with that practiced, placating smile. Brooke's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes avoiding mine, as if witnessing the moment but refusing to intervene. They were all complicit, and the cold truth settled like ice in my chest. I looked down at Lily, who was still clutching my hand, her wide eyes filled with innocence and confusion. "Mommy, why are they talking like that?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the airport bustle. Tears sprang unbidden to my eyes, blurring my vision. I knelt down, pulling her close. "They're just saying things that aren't true, sweetheart. But you're not alone. Mommy's right here." Before I could gather myself, I heard the distant call of the gate agent. "All passengers for Flight 372 to Orlando, please proceed to the boarding area. Final boarding is now beginning." The words echoed around us like a death knell. My father turned toward the queue, motioning to Elaine and Brooke. None of them looked back. The three of them moved forward in a synchronized, indifferent wave, stepping past me and Lily as if we had ceased to exist. "Come on, Lily," I whispered, instinctively pulling her toward me. "We're going with them." But Gerald's voice stopped me cold. "No, you stay here. This is for her own good." The finality in his tone brooked no argument. I felt my knees weaken. The bustling crowd of travelers pressed around us, yet in that moment, I was utterly alone. Strangers passed by, some glancing our way with curiosity or pity, others lost in their own worlds. I spotted a few airport staff nearby, their eyes flicking to the scene with polite concern, but no immediate intervention. My fingers trembled as I tightened my grip on Lily's hand, refusing to let go despite the weight pressing down on me. "Please," I said, voice shaking. "You can't do this. She's just a child. You're supposed to protect her." Brooke's voice cut through the air like a cold breeze. "Don't make us feel guilty. She needs to learn a lesson. This will teach her responsibility." Her words were calm, but devoid of warmth, a declaration rather than a plea. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The sister I had once confided in, the one I thought might stand up for us, was siding against me. The walls I'd been trying to hold together were crumbling. The announcement blared again. "Last call for Flight 372 to Orlando. All remaining passengers, please board immediately." Time was running out. "Noah," I whispered urgently, pulling out my phone. I dialed him, voice barely a breath. "They're leaving her here. Please come. Now." He answered quickly, and I heard the tension in his voice as he said, "I'm on my way. Hang tight." I looked down at Lily's face, her confusion, the flicker of fear beginning to shadow her bright eyes, and my heart shattered into fragments I didn't know I could piece back together. The family I had trusted, the people who were supposed to love and protect my daughter, were walking away. The gate agent's voice softened as she approached, glancing between me and Lily. "Are you okay? Is she alone?" I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "No, she's with me. But my family, they're boarding without her." The agent frowned, picking up her radio. "We'll get someone to assist you. Don't worry." But the damage was done. The message had been sent. Lily was expendable, a tool in their harsh lesson plan. I held her close, the noise of the airport fading into a dull roar as my mind raced with questions and panic. How could they be so cold? What kind of family abandons a child in a place like this? As the final group of passengers disappeared down the jetway, I was left standing there, holding my daughter's trembling hand, surrounded by strangers and the hollow echo of betrayal. The weight of everything, the years of sacrifice, the quiet endurance, the hope for belonging, pressed down on me like a suffocating fog. And as the plane took off without us, soaring toward a destination filled with promises of magic and joy, I realized that our world had just fractured in a way nothing could fix without a fight. The moments after my family boarded without Lily felt like a cruel pause in time, an unbearable stillness amid the constant motion of the airport terminal. I was kneeling there, clutching Lily's small hand like a lifeline, the echo of their footsteps fading away, but the cold weight of their abandonment settling deep in my chest. Shock hit me first, a dull, numbing disbelief that this was happening, that the people who were supposed to love and protect my daughter could be so callous. But that shock didn't last long. It quickly gave way to a swirl of grief and bewilderment. How could they do this? How could my own father, the man who raised me, be so utterly indifferent? How had I been blind to this cruelty for so long? I held Lily close, her trusting eyes searching mine, and I swallowed hard against the lump rising in my throat. "Mommy's here," I whispered, trying to sound calm, though inside I was collapsing. I could feel her small fingers tighten around mine, a fragile anchor in a sea of uncertainty. My mind raced back through years of silent sacrifices, emotional labor, and endless attempts to keep the peace. All those times I had put their needs before my own, hoping it would earn me a place in a family that seemed to have already decided where I belonged. The financial help I'd given, the caregiving I'd provided, the quiet endurance of criticism and neglect, it all came crashing down, raw and exposed. A bitter flame of anger flared inside me, sharp and consuming. This wasn't just about Lily being left alone in a crowded airport. It was about a lifetime of neglect and emotional exploitation finally breaking through the surface. I thought about the countless times I had swallowed my pain to avoid making waves, the dinners where Gerald belittled me in front of relatives, the family gatherings where I was invisible or blamed, the sacrifices that were met with cold, ungrateful silence. They had never truly seen me. Not really. And now, they were using my daughter as a pawn to enforce their twisted lesson. I felt the icy clarity of realization settle over me. This family, the very people I had devoted so much of myself to, would never change. Their love was conditional, tied to obedience and conformity, not the messy, imperfect reality of being human. The lesson they wanted Lily to learn was not one of kindness or growth. It was a lesson in power and control, taught through abandonment and rejection. I had been blind to it for too long, hoping that my efforts would soften their hearts. But now, I saw the truth with painful sharpness. My loyalty had been met with cold indifference, the anguish and fury inside me intertwined, creating a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I wasn't just a victim of their cruelty anymore. I refused to be. This moment was a turning point, a fracture in the pattern of silent suffering that had defined my existence. I knew I owed Lily more than just words or empty promises. She deserved protection, respect, and love that didn't come with strings attached. And if the people I called family couldn't provide that, then I would have to stand up for her myself. A flicker of hope sparked within the storm of emotions. I might not have control over what my family chose to do, but I could control how I responded. I could fight back. I could set boundaries. I could demand accountability for the pain they caused. The thought steadied me, a lifeline in the overwhelming flood of grief and betrayal. This was no longer just about enduring. It was about reclaiming dignity, carving out a space where my daughter and I could be safe from their cruelty. Sitting on the cold airport floor, surrounded by strangers and the relentless hum of the terminal, I made a silent vow. The lesson that Lily would learn from now on would come from me. Love without conditions, strength without bitterness, and the courage to walk away from what didn't serve us. The road ahead was uncertain and daunting, but I knew I couldn't let this moment define us. Instead, it would be the catalyst, the moment I finally chose to protect my family on my own terms. As I held Lily close, her small frame trembling against mine, I felt the weight of history press down, but beneath it, a fierce determination began to grow. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I could see a way out of the shadow my family had cast over us. It was time to stop hoping for change that would never come and start creating the future Lily deserved, one where she was safe, valued, and loved unconditionally. The fight had just begun. The moment that cold finality hit, that they could just leave Lily behind, I knew I couldn't let this slide. But anger alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan, something solid, something that would protect my daughter and me from any future betrayals. So, as the shock began to fade into a simmering determination, I started taking careful steps, almost like a nurse charting a patient's progress, documenting, gathering evidence, preparing for battle on my own terms. I pulled out my phone and began quietly saving every text message, every voicemail, every email that had passed between my family members over the past few weeks, and even months. The group chats that once felt like casual check-ins now looked like cold, calculated dismissals. Messages from my mother and sister urging me to be reasonable or not overreact. The curt replies from Dad that barely masked disdain. The dismissive emojis when I voiced concern about Lily's well-being. All of it was there, on my screen. I screenshot everything, storing it in a secure folder labeled simply, "For Lily." The texts were like pieces of a puzzle, revealing a side of the family I'd been reluctant to fully see. Conversations where they talked about Lily as if she were a problem to be managed, not a child to be loved. Discussions about money and favors that came with strings attached. Even planning for the trip itself, where their attitude towards Lily was cold at best. It was easier to connect the dots when the words were laid out plainly, stripped of the polite smiles and vague justifications I'd heard in person. I also started keeping a detailed journal, an extension of the notebook I'd carried since my nursing school days. Every time my family crossed a line, whether it was a slight, an aside, or outright cruelty, I wrote it down. Date, time, who was involved, and what was said or done. At first it felt exhausting, but it also gave me a strange sense of control. For the first time, I was no longer just absorbing the pain. I was creating a record that could protect us, but documenting wasn't enough. I knew I had to get legal advice. The thought of confronting my family in court made my stomach churn. But this was about Lily's safety and mine. A few days after the airport incident, I reached out to a family law attorney recommended by a trusted colleague. The woman on the other end of the line listened patiently as I explained the situation, the abandonment, the toxic family dynamics, the financial entanglements. Her voice was calm, but firm as she outlined my options: custody protections, financial safeguards, even restraining orders if necessary. She stressed the importance of acting quickly to secure legal guardianship details, to prevent my parents or sister from making decisions about Lily without my consent. She also advised me to gather all financial documents related to any accounts or loans associated with my parents and Brooke, so we could untangle the mess and protect our own assets. It was overwhelming, but the clarity she provided helped to crystallize the path forward. Back home, I began combing through bank statements, loan agreements, and insurance policies. I found joint accounts I hadn't even realized existed anymore. Accounts that my parents or sister could access. I changed passwords, updated security questions, and notified financial institutions about possible fraud risks. My hands trembled as I signed forms to remove co-signers from loans and to place alerts on credit reports. Noah watched me silently, sometimes rubbing my back when I felt the weight getting heavier. At the same time, I quietly informed Lily's school about the situation, just enough so that they knew to contact me directly and to watch out for any unusual communications from my parents or sister. It felt strange, involving outsiders in what had always been a private family matter, but I knew I had to do everything possible to keep Lily safe. Throughout all this, I maintained a calm exterior around my family. At first, they didn't notice the changes, the saved messages, the locked accounts, the lawyer's letters, because I wasn't confrontational. I answered calls less frequently and stopped rushing to fix their problems. When my mother asked why I hadn't responded to a request for help with a bill, I gave vague excuses about being busy at work or needing to check with Noah first. But beneath the surface, I was building a fortress. I wanted to keep them off balance, unsure of how much I knew or what I was planning. I was done being the invisible puppet in their hands. This time, I would hold the strings. In this quiet phase of planning, I found strength I didn't know I had. The notebook I kept became a symbol, a reminder that I was no longer willing to be silent or erased. Every entry was a step toward reclaiming my voice, protecting Lily, and demanding the respect we deserved. The airport abandonment had cracked open a wound, but it also uncovered a resolve burning fiercely beneath the pain. The family I thought I knew, the ones who once called me responsible while dismissing my sacrifices, would soon learn that their games had consequences. And though the battle ahead was uncertain, I was ready to fight, quietly but fiercely, armed with truth, documentation, and an unbreakable commitment to my daughter's future. After the airport incident, I knew I couldn't keep going the way I had before. The careful balance I'd maintained, constantly giving without expecting real gratitude or reciprocity, had tipped too far. And in that moment, I realized that subtlety would be my weapon going forward. I wasn't about to confront them head-on yet. That would only give them time to rally or dismiss me. No, I needed to pull back slowly, methodically, show them that I was no longer the family's safety net, the one who would drop everything to bail them out or smooth over their messes. The first step was financial. Over the years, I had co-signed several loans for my parents and Brooke, mortgages, car payments, business loans, and while I'd always hoped it was temporary, it had become a constant drain. After the airport betrayal, I sat down with Noah one evening at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows as we pored over the mountain of paperwork. "We can't keep dangling ourselves over this," I said quietly. "If they can abandon Lily at the airport, what's to stop them from doing more damage financially?" Noah nodded, his jaw tight but eyes steady. "We have to start protecting ourselves," he said. The next day, I began refusing their requests for help. When my mother called, asking if I could co-sign a small loan for a home repair, I hesitated but said no. I felt the familiar sting of disappointment in her voice, thinly veiled as frustration. "I just don't understand why you're being so difficult," she said. "We're family." But I held firm, reminding myself that family wasn't just about blood. It was about respect, and they had shown me none. When Dad texted about a medical bill needing coverage, I replied that Noah and I were tightening our budget and couldn't help this time. The silence that followed was deafening, a cold void where the usual expectations had been. Caregiving requests came next. When my mother asked if I could pick up some medications or check in on Dad's health appointments, I declined or said I was swamped at work. It felt strange at first, pushing back on something so familiar, but I reminded myself that I had a little girl to protect now. Lily's safety and emotional well-being were my priority. I began passing off responsibility to home health aides or nursing services, letting professionals handle tasks I used to shoulder alone. The relief was immediate, but bittersweet. It was a sign of independence, but also a sign of distance growing where there once was closeness. Financial gifts were the hardest to withhold. For years, I had quietly sent money to help with bills or surprise Brooke on birthdays, trying to maintain a semblance of family warmth. But after that day at the airport, I realized that generosity without boundaries was only enabling cruelty. So I stopped. No more just because transfers. No more covering incidental expenses. When Brooke's business asked for another loan, I politely declined, explaining I needed to focus on my own family's future. She didn't respond. That silence, that absence of thanks or understanding, made my decision feel less like a sacrifice and more like reclaiming power. The most tangible shift came when I changed passwords and secured financial accounts. Joint bank accounts with my parents or Brooke were quietly closed or altered to restrict access. Credit card accounts that I'd linked for emergencies were unlinked. I notified banks and loan offices about my concerns, placing alerts to detect any suspicious activity. Each phone call to institutions felt like a small battle, a confirmation that the family I trusted most had tangled me in webs I needed to cut free from. Noah was my rock during these moments, reminding me to breathe when the stress threatened to overwhelm. I also took steps to update Lily's legal protections. With the guidance of my attorney, I quietly filed notices at her school and daycare, ensuring all communications required my direct consent. I requested that no family member other than Noah or me be allowed to make decisions on her behalf without prior approval. It felt invasive to involve outsiders in family affairs, but after the airport incident, I knew it was necessary. Lily's safety was non-negotiable. Meanwhile, I became more distant in family group texts and calls. Where I once answered promptly and tried to smooth over tensions, I now responded sparsely or not at all. When Elaine sent a message about an upcoming gathering, I simply said, "Can't make it." When Brooke tagged me in a photo with a smug caption, I didn't reply. The silence was confusing to them, perhaps even alarming, but I stayed quiet. This was my shield, a way to keep them uncertain about my boundaries without sparking immediate confrontation. At the same time, I built a discreet support network outside the family. I confided in a few close friends and colleagues, people who knew my history and offered practical advice and emotional support. Their empathy was a balm to the wounds my family reopened every time I thought I could trust them. I also began seeing a therapist, someone who helped me process the tangled emotions of betrayal, anger, and grief. It was empowering to have a safe space to voice what I'd been suppressing for years. Throughout this phase, I kept my calm, well-rehearsed. Around my parents and Brooke, I maintained a neutral tone, avoiding direct accusations or emotional outbursts. I wanted to keep them guessing, unsure of the extent of my resolve. This quiet withdrawal was a statement in itself, a boundary drawn more sharply by absence than words. I saw the slight shifts in their behavior. Snide remarks in texts, cold shoulders at family events, attempts to guilt me into old patterns, but I refused to be pulled back in. Inside me, a fierce determination grew. This subtle retreat was not surrender, it was strategy. I was taking back the ground I'd lost over decades of sacrifice and invisibility. I was protecting Lily from the toxic dynamics that had shaped my own childhood and adulthood. And while the family might not understand or forgive, I was done being the invisible caretaker who got nothing but abuse in return. The airport terminal had been the place of abandonment, but now it became the symbol of my awakening. The lesson I would teach Lily from this point on was clear. Love means protection, boundaries, and standing firm even when it's hard. And for me, that meant stepping back from a family that had never truly valued me, and stepping forward to build a new future on my own terms. The moment I decided to take action, I knew it had to be decisive and thorough. The abandonment at the airport wasn't just a reckless act of cruelty. It was a glaring sign that my parents and sister couldn't be trusted with anything related to Lily's welfare anymore. I couldn't afford to be passive, to hope they'd somehow change. So, with the cold clarity born of years of disappointment, I set out to remove their control, legally and financially, from my daughter's life. The first step was to contact my family lawyer. I needed professional guidance to untangle the complicated web of custody rights, financial claims, and legal entanglements that my family had long exploited. The attorney, Mrs. Carlson, was a seasoned woman who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. I sat in her office, clutching Lily's favorite stuffed rabbit, while explaining everything. The airport incident, the history of favoritism and neglect, the unpaid loans tied to my name, and the growing fear for Lily's safety and future. Mrs. Carlson listened, nodding thoughtfully, then laid out the options clearly. We started by revisiting the custody arrangements. Though I was Lily's primary guardian, my parents and sister had, over time, acquired some informal rights, visitation permissions, emergency contacts, even partial access to certain medical records and school information because of their persistent presence in Lily's life. These tenuous privileges, once seemingly harmless, now felt like dangerous loopholes. With legal paperwork, we moved swiftly to revoke any custodial or decision-making rights held by them. My lawyer filed motions to clarify that no family member besides Noah and me could make decisions about Lily's health, education, or welfare without our explicit consent. Next came the financial disentanglement. Over the years, I discovered that I was still co-signed on multiple loans for my parents and Brooke, a mortgage on my childhood home, a car lease, and a business line of credit for Brooke's company. Each was a ticking time bomb, potential liabilities that could drag me down further if those debts went unpaid. I worked with the lawyer and financial advisors to remove my name from those agreements, a painstaking process requiring careful negotiation with banks and creditors. I closed joint accounts shared with my parents and sister, changed passwords, and established new, secure accounts solely under my and Noah's control. At home, late into the night, I compiled a comprehensive dossier of every interaction, document, and text that painted the full picture of their neglect and manipulation. Screenshots of group texts, where they callously discuss Lily as a problem, voicemail recordings where Elaine attempts to justify their actions, and notes from conversations where they dismiss my concerns. My notebook, once a simple journal of family dynamics, now transformed into a file of evidence. I knew that if this ever ended up in court, it would be vital to demonstrate the pattern of cruelty and neglect, not just the singular incident at the airport. Once the legal groundwork was laid, I turned to the public front. The incident at the airport had not gone unnoticed by other travelers and staff. Several kind strangers offered their contact information, willing to attest to the abandonment and the distress it caused Lily and me. I reached out to them, asking permission to share their accounts to strengthen my position. Their statements were heartfelt and unequivocal, a stark contrast to the cold indifference I'd witnessed from my own family. Compiling all this, I made the difficult decision to go public. I crafted a carefully worded post for social media, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I shared the story of what happened at the airport, laying bare the abandonment and the toxic family dynamics, supported by documentation and witness testimonies. I was cautious not to cast blame gratuitously, but I was firm in revealing the truth. For the first time, I refused to suppress my story behind closed doors. I needed the world, and my family, to understand the gravity of their actions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives reached out with messages of support and disbelief. The story sparked conversations about family loyalty and boundaries, and I felt fortified by the solidarity. But the biggest shock was the silence from my parents and sister. They were blindsided. Public exposure stripped them of their carefully maintained facade. Gerald's grip on the family's narrative crumbled visibly as whispers of scandal spread through social circles. In the days after the post went live, I took further steps to protect Lily's future. I amended my will, removing my parents and Brooke as beneficiaries or decision-makers. Any joint financial arrangements with them were severed. I informed Lily's school and pediatrician of the changes in custody and guardianship, making it clear that only Noah and I had authority to act on her behalf. Each administrative task was a small but significant victory, asserting control over a life that had been so precariously placed in others' hands. Through it all, I maintained a composed exterior. I didn't engage with the angry calls or messages from my family. They were attempts to intimidate or guilt me into silence. I stood firm, echoing silently the promise I'd made to Lily at the airport. I would protect her no matter what. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt the power of agency. I was no longer a passive participant in a dysfunctional family drama. I was the architect of a new, safer reality for my daughter. The airport terminal, once a symbol of abandonment and cruelty, had become the catalyst for a reckoning. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I was ready to defend it with everything I had. My family's cold lesson had ignited a fire in me. a determination to fight for dignity, respect, and unconditional love for Lily. But even as I fortified our lives, I knew the battle was far from over. The wheels I set in motion would ripple through the family, challenging old power structures and forcing confrontations I could no longer avoid. The next steps would test everything I believed about loyalty, justice, and strength. And so, holding tight to Lily's hand, I prepared for the storm that was coming. Because now, the lesson was mine to teach. The fallout from my public stand was swift and overwhelming. Almost overnight, the fragile facade of my parents' carefully curated life began to crack, revealing the chaos and neglect lurking beneath. Unpaid bills started surfacing like unwelcome shadows in their wake, creditors calling my parents, emails piling up with overdue notices, and service interruptions that none of them seemed eager to address. The financial stability they had always boasted about was unraveling, and with it, their social standing in the tight-knit community we lived in. I heard about it through whispers from mutual acquaintances and the subtle shifts in invitations. Dinner parties I used to be invited to became conspicuously absent from my calendar, while calls from old family friends turned tentative, or simply stopped altogether. It was as if the news of the airport incident had spread like wildfire, and suddenly, everyone was questioning the integrity of the Hills. The people who once smiled politely at family gatherings now exchanged furtive glances and murmured behind closed doors. I could see the reputation that had been built over decades begin to crumble, piece by piece. At home, the tension was electric. Gerald's usual commanding presence faltered under the weight of the mounting crises. I could feel it in his voice during the rare phone calls he made to me, once curt and authoritative, now edged with desperation and uncertainty. Elaine's demeanor shifted too. The placating smile that once masked her guilt was replaced by nervous fidgeting and tearful pleas. "Mavis," she said one evening, voice trembling, "we never meant for things to get this far. Please, can we talk? For Lily's sake?" But I was no longer the pliable daughter she had relied upon for so long. The years of betrayal and neglect had cemented a new boundary in me. I listened quietly, my heart aching for the mother I wished Elaine could be, but I didn't offer the easy forgiveness or reassurance they sought. Instead, I gently but firmly explained, "This isn't just about a lesson anymore. It's about trust. And right now, that trust is broken." The calls and messages from both of them became more frequent, then frantic. Gerald's voice, once a source of comfort and authority in my childhood, now felt alien and accusing. "You're tearing the family apart," he said during a particularly heated call. "You're punishing us for trying to teach Lily responsibility." But there was no room for negotiation. The lesson they wanted to teach was cruel, and the punishment had come at an unacceptable cost. I remained resolute, refusing to be drawn into their manipulative attempts to rewrite the narrative or guilt me into submission. Brooke's role was more complicated. She tried to mediate, reaching out in what felt like half-hearted attempts to bridge the widening divide. Her messages were a mixture of guilt-tripped apologies and veiled criticisms, trying to maintain her golden child status while subtly reminding me of the family ties I was jeopardizing. "Mavis, we all make mistakes," she wrote. "Can't we just move past this for Lily's sake?" But her words rang hollow, lacking the warmth and sincerity I needed. I could see through the charm, recognizing it as another form of control dressed up as concern. The family's desperation grew as their social circle began to question their integrity. Invitations dwindled, business associates distanced themselves, and even casual acquaintances avoided the once respected Hills. The ripple effect was undeniable. Careers stalled, alliances fractured, and old alliances turned cold. They were losing not just respect, but also the support systems they had long taken for granted. I watched from a cautious distance as the consequences unfolded. It was painful to witness the family I once dreamed of being part of unravel, but I also knew that this reckoning was necessary. The cracks in their armor exposed uncomfortable truths that had been hidden for too long. Their refusal to take responsibility had finally caught up with them, and I was determined to ensure they faced the fallout. Noah stood by me unwaveringly throughout this tumult. His steady presence was a balm when the family's panic spilled over into desperate phone calls or tearful voicemails. He reminded me of why I was fighting, not just for myself, but for Lily's future. "This is the moment we protect what matters," he said quietly, holding my hand as the storm brewed outside our door. Friends and colleagues rallied around us, offering support and practical help. I was no longer isolated in this battle. The network I had quietly built became a fortress against the onslaught of family drama and societal judgment. Their belief in me rekindled a strength I hadn't realized was still inside. Yet, despite the chaos engulfing my parents and sister, I remained focused on one thing: ensuring Lily's safety and well-being above all else. The unraveling of the Hills world was painful to watch, but it was a necessary reckoning, a consequence of their own choices. As their lives spiraled into uncertainty and public scrutiny, I held fast to the resolve that had carried me this far. The airport abandonment was no longer just an isolated act of cruelty. It had become the catalyst for exposing a lifetime of dysfunction. And while the family's panic and pleas echoed in the background, I knew that the fight to protect Lily and rebuild our lives had only just begun. The aftermath of my decision rippled far beyond the initial shock of that day at the airport. What had once seemed like a fragile family facade quickly crumbled under mounting pressure, both financial and social. Unpaid bills began to surface, like insistent ghosts from the past my parents could no longer ignore. Creditors started calling, emails flooded inboxes with overdue notices, and service providers threatened to cut off utilities. The financial safety net that Gerald and Elaine had long boasted about was unraveling, exposing an instability they had desperately hidden beneath layers of pride. I heard about these troubles through whispers and guarded comments from neighbors and distant relatives. Invitations to family gatherings and social events dwindled, often disappearing entirely from my calendar. Calls from longtime family friends became sporadic or ceased altogether. The quiet judgment of the community was tangible, an invisible but weighty presence that settled like dust on every interaction. It was as if the story of Lily's abandonment had spread faster than wildfire. Suddenly, the Hills' reputation wasn't just tarnished. It was splintered. Within the walls of their home, the tension grew unbearable. Gerald's usual commanding presence began to falter under the relentless weight of financial and social crisis. There was a strain in his voice when he called, no longer the stern authority figure I once feared, but a man fraying at the edges, desperate and uncertain. Elaine, too, seemed to shrink beneath the pressure. Gone was the practiced, placating smile that had softened many of my childhood wounds. Instead, she fidgeted anxiously, her eyes clouded with guilt and fear. One evening, I received a call from her, the voice trembling, fragile. "Mavis," she said, barely above a whisper, "we never meant for things to get this far. Please, can we talk? For Lily's sake?" Her plea tugged at something buried deep inside me, a flicker of the mother I wished she could be. But years of neglect and enabling had forged new boundaries in me, boundaries I was no longer willing to cross lightly. I held my breath as I replied, "Elaine, this isn't just about a lesson anymore. It's about trust. And right now, that trust is broken." Calls and messages from both my parents increased in frequency and desperation. Gerald's voice, once a source of comfort and authority in my childhood, now sounded alien and accusing. "You're tearing this family apart," he barked during a heated phone exchange. "You're punishing us for trying to teach Lily responsibility." His frustration was palpable, but it was met with my calm, unwavering resolve. "What you did was cruel. I won't let Lily pay the price for your lesson." Brooke's involvement was more complicated. She attempted to mediate, her messages a confusing mix of guilt-tripped apologies and veiled criticisms. "Mavis, we all make mistakes," she wrote. "Can't we just move past this for Lily's sake?" But her words rang hollow. I could see through the veneer of concern, recognizing the subtle attempt to maintain control under the guise of family unity. Her charm, once comforting, now felt like another form of manipulation. As the family's desperation grew, so did their isolation. Invitations dwindled, business connections cooled, and acquaintances avoided engagements once taken for granted. The ripple effect was devastating. The social circles that had buoyed my parents and sister now distanced themselves, questioning the integrity behind the polished image. Careers faced setbacks, and old alliances fractured under the strain of public scrutiny. Watching this unraveling was painful, a visceral reminder of the family I had once longed to belong to. But it was also undeniably necessary. The cracks exposed harsh truths long concealed beneath decades of denial and silence. Their refusal to accept responsibility had finally caught up with them, and I was determined they would face those consequences head-on. Throughout the chaos, Noah remained my steadfast pillar. His quiet strength was a balm when the family's frantic calls spilled into tearful voicemails or angry confrontations. "This is the moment we protect what matters most," he reminded me frequently, squeezing my hand as the storm brewed around us. Friends and colleagues rallied, offering practical help and emotional support. I was no longer isolated in this battle. My support network became my fortress. Their belief in me rekindled a strength I hadn't fully known I possessed. Despite the family's turmoil, my focus never wavered. Lily's safety and well-being were paramount. The Hills' unraveling was painful to witness, but it was a reckoning born from choices they had made. Their world was fracturing, but I was building a new foundation, one where my daughter could grow free from the shadows of neglect and cruelty. The airport abandonment had become more than a painful memory. It was the catalyst for exposing a lifetime of dysfunction. And while the echoes of my family's panic and pleas reverberated, I stood firm, ready to face whatever came next. The fight to protect my daughter and reclaim our lives was only beginning. I knew I had reached a crossroads where the only way forward was to draw firm, unbreakable boundaries around my life and, most importantly, around Lily's well-being. I wasn't just protecting my daughter. I was reclaiming myself from the shadows of a family that had long demanded obedience at the cost of love and respect. The lesson I needed to teach wasn't one of submission or sacrifice. It was one of dignity, strength, and self-respect. After weeks of turmoil, confrontation, and painful realizations, I sat down with Noah one evening in the quiet of our living room. The house was dim, except for a small lamp casting a warm glow, and Lily was asleep upstairs, peaceful and unaware of the storm swirling around her family. Noah's steady presence beside me was grounding, his hand gently holding mine as we talked through what I knew had to come next, establishing clear terms for any future contact with my parents and sister. I looked him in the eyes and said, "If they want to be part of Lily's life, it has to be on new terms. Terms where respect, accountability, and equal treatment aren't negotiable." I felt a weight lift in me as I said the words aloud. For so long, I had tiptoed around my family's expectations, hoping for approval while ignoring the wounds their behavior left behind. Now, I was drawing lines in the sand with purpose. Those terms weren't just empty words or ultimatums. They were a framework for safety and healing. I made it clear to myself and to Noah that any contact with my parents or Brooke must come with genuine respect. No dismissive comments, no backhanded lessons, no manipulations disguised as concern. There had to be accountability for past harm, acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused, and a commitment to change. Without those, I would maintain my distance, because Lily and I deserved better than half measures or toxic apologies. In the days that followed, I turned this resolve into action. Phone calls and texts from my mother and father were met with calm but firm responses outlining these boundaries. When Elaine reached out with tearful pleas to make things right, I listened but didn't rush to forgive. I told her, gently but clearly, that trust was broken and would need to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. When Brooke sent messages cloaked in concern but tinged with old patterns of control, I was polite but unyielding. This isn't about convenience or appearances anymore. It's about real change and respect. I also took tangible steps to reinforce these boundaries in practical ways. We updated legal guardianship paperwork to reflect that no family member could make decisions about Lily without our explicit consent. I restricted access to school and medical records to Noah and myself. Social media interactions were carefully curated. I removed any family members who failed to respect our new boundaries. But it wasn't just about cutting ties or issuing ultimatums. My focus shifted decisively to nurturing the family I had chosen, the one that truly supported and loved us. Noah, Lily, and our circle of trusted friends. Those relationships deepened in ways I hadn't allowed before. I started carving out space for joy and healing, attending community events with Lily, making time for quiet evenings with Noah, and opening up more honestly with close friends who had stood by me through everything. Therapy sessions, too, became a vital part of this new chapter, talking through the tangled emotions. The hurt, anger, grief, and hope gave me tools to heal and grow. I learned to recognize patterns of toxic loyalty and how to protect myself emotionally without guilt. Most importantly, I learned that love does not require silence in the face of abuse. It requires boundaries, respect, and above all, safety. There were moments of loneliness. Yes, family holidays felt different without the familiar but painful presence of my parents and Brooke. I missed what I wished could have been, a family united in kindness rather than control. But those moments were tempered with a quiet peace. I no longer carried the burden of trying to fix what was broken beyond repair. Instead, I focused on building a future where Lily could thrive in a world free from the shadows of neglect and manipulation. I watched her grow with fresh eyes, seeing her confidence bloom, knowing she was being raised in a space where she was valued for exactly who she is. Every smile she gave me, every story she shared about her day, was a testament to the strength we were cultivating together. And while my parents and sister faced the consequences of their choices, the unraveling of their social circles, the exposure of long-hidden truths, and the painful reckonings that came with it, I stood firm in my commitment to protect what mattered most. I wasn't interested in revenge or bitterness. I was invested in healing and setting a new standard for what family could and should be. The airport terminal had been the place where everything fell apart, but it also became the birthplace of my resolve to never let that kind of abandonment happen again. The lesson Lily would learn from now on wasn't one of coldness or punishment, but of resilience, love without conditions, and the courage to demand respect. The road ahead would have challenges, no doubt. Old wounds take time to heal, and the past lingers in the quiet moments. But I was no longer defined by those wounds. I was defined by my choice to protect, to set boundaries, and to build a family where love was real and unconditional. Holding Lily's hand, I knew that whatever happened next, we were ready. Our family was no longer just about blood or obligation. It was about trust, safety, and the fierce, unbreakable love that had carried us this far. And that, I realized, was the most important lesson of all.